This module discusses inequality as a social problem. Social inequality exists when there are patterns of unequal opportunities and rewards for different socially defined groups within a society. When this form of inequality is stable and a recurring pattern in society, it is often considered a social problem. The most commonly studied types of social inequality include class inequality, racial inequality, and gender inequality. Social class is the classification of individuals based on their economic resources, wealth, income, as well as social status and power. Wealth is the sum total of an individual's valuable assets, home ownership, stocks, properties, cash reserves, etc. Income is the total earnings of an individual over a given period of time, annual salary, weekly paycheck, etc. Individuals might have a low income but a lot of wealth. For example, someone who is retired but owns a lot of houses. Social class is often grouped into the following categories: upper class, middle class, often divided into upper middle and lower middle, working class, and poor. However, as noted in the definition, class isn't only related to the amount of economic resources individuals have. Other factors contribute to a person's class, including education level, occupational status, and family background, which provides cultural capital. Imagine three different individuals. One is a college professor, another is a politician, and the third is a plumber. All three of these individuals might earn roughly the same income and could potentially have the same amount of wealth. However, the first two jobs tend to have higher occupational status, which is the amount of prestige or social honor attached to those particular jobs. Similarly, the first two jobs require a greater amount of formal education. Therefore, the occupations of college professor and politician are often considered upper class or upper middle class jobs, whereas the occupation of plumber is often considered a lower middle class or working class job. Upper class and middle class jobs tend to be considered higher status occupations. Working class jobs tend to be considered lower status occupations. Individuals with upper and middle class jobs experience authority in the workplace. More freedom in their job, they tend to give orders. Those with working class jobs experience lack of authority, less freedom, and mostly just take orders. Cultural capital refers to the non-material resources that affect people's chances and opportunities. This includes dress, speech, and taste in arts and culture. It also includes education credentials and one's outlooks and beliefs. For example, we often imagine the Queen of England as being high class. This is not only due to her wealth, but a presumption that she has sophisticated taste and behavior. In contrast, Americans often deride people who live in poor rural areas as not having class. We may imagine that they have unsophisticated taste and behavior. Social class is related to life chances. Some examples: the higher the social class of an individual, the more likely they are to achieve high levels of education. The less likely they are to experience a crime, the less likely they are to become addicted to a drug, the more likely they are to travel internationally. The above relationships are probabilistic, not deterministic. This means that it is possible for someone of high social class to become addicted to drugs. However, in general, the likelihood of drug addiction is lower for people from higher social classes. Is class inequality a social problem? Most Americans believe that some inequality is good because it incentivizes hard work. However, a recent study demonstrates that the actual level of wealth inequality is much greater than what most Americans believe it should be. In fact, it's even much greater than what Americans think it is. Consider the following graph. In the U.S., most people believe our country is a meritocracy. A meritocracy is a social system in which people's success is dependent only on their own efforts and abilities. In a meritocracy, social mobility allows individuals to change class. Social mobility is the movement of individuals up or down from their past position, or the position of their parents, in the social class system. It is certainly true that there is social mobility in the U.S. However, individuals are most likely to end up in roughly the same social class they grew up in. In fact, the poorest and richest individuals are much less likely to move out of their social class than the rest of society. In other words, if you're born rich, you're probably going to end up rich, regardless of your actions. The same is true for the poor. Remember, this is just a description of a probabilistic pattern. When people do not experience class mobility and instead remain in the same social class as their parents, we call this the reproduction of the social class. How is social class reproduced? 1. Laws. Inheritance laws allow children to inherit the wealth of their parents. Therefore, children with rich parents inherit more and tend to be richer, while children with poor parents inherit less and tend to be poorer. 2. Social capital, or the networks of connections to other people through social relationships that an individual has. It has been demonstrated that many jobs in the U.S. are found through social connections. If lower-class people know primarily other lower-class people, then they will likely only connect each other to lower-class jobs. The same will be true for other social classes as well. 3. Cultural capital. Behavior, beliefs, and values that reflect one's class upbringing influence our views of others. People are often prejudiced in favor of those with similar behaviors, values, and beliefs. This reinforces class identities and perpetuates social classes. As was mentioned briefly above, cultural capital mostly comes from an individual's family background, where child-rearing is important. Annette LaRoe studied the connection between child-rearing practices and the reproduction of social class. Recall the video in your reading folder that described this study. LaRoe finds that the occupational status of parents shapes the way they relate to and socialize their kids. Parents from the upper and middle classes often encourage children to be independent, explore, to be creative, think critically, question authority, and feel entitled to a voice. Parents from the working class often emphasize adherence to authority, obedience, and conformity. Neither parenting approach is necessarily better than the other, but the different approaches do differentially impact the life chances of children. This also allows class structure to be continually reproduced by training children to be order givers or order takers. Is the existence of social class a problem in society? Evidence indicates that the levels of wealth distribution in the U.S. are far less equal than people think they are and think that they should be. Also, though there is social mobility in the U.S., individuals are likely to end up about the same social class that they began due to laws, social capital, and cultural capital. Kids born in higher class families have unearned advantages in determining their own economic futures. Finally, a large proportion of the country lives in poverty, even though most of them work, while the country as a whole is one of the wealthiest in the world. Poverty, living on an income below what is necessary to cover basic life expenses. Examine the following table. Notice that 22% of U.S. children live in poverty. Also notice that this varies by race, with racial minorities, blacks and Hispanics, having a much higher child poverty rate than whites. This implies that race and class inequality are related. Wealth is important for transferring economic class across generations. If a child inherits a lot of money from their family, it is easier to be financially successful. Given this fact, re-examine the graph in the link provided to you in your reading folder. This disparity in wealth by race is likely to continue due to the factors perpetuating class inequality discussed previously. However, there are other reasons that this race inequality occurs.